Welcome to the Raising Wealthy Kids seminar. I am your host, Stephanie Brooke Lennon. I am so glad you're here. Today we'll talk about strategies to help your children learn personal finance, why it's so important, and how to do it within your household. This will set them up for a lifetime of success, at least in the money department and possibly in the health and longevity as well. Let's get started. There really is just one big punchline, which is give your children control early on of the money you're already planning to spend on them. Give them a chance to weigh in on it, to practice making the decisions, to understand financial trade-offs, and to let them build that muscle memory. All right, that's it. Any questions? All right, just kidding. We have a lot more material. But this is the punchline, the executive summary. We'll keep coming back to this. 3 topics that we're going to cover. Took a lesson from Simon Sinek, which is start with why. So we will start with why. We will then go into how to put this together for your family, and then what outcomes to expect. If your family is anything similar at all to mine, we'll share with you what we've experienced over the last 5 years in our household and what you may also start to experience once you implement the system. So let's get started. Let's start with why. Why do money skills matter for kids? Well, I could tell you 1,000 reasons, but we'll start with ChatGPT and see what artificial intelligence thinks. I asked it one question the very first time, and this is what it told me. Financial literacy was the #1 thing it returned as the top 10 life skills that children should learn before graduating high school in the US. Maybe it's different elsewhere, but it's probably not that different. Financial literacy is not commonly taught in the schools today. You may get a few classes here and there, budgeting, definitely how to count your pennies, nickels, and dimes, maybe something about calculating simple or compound interest. But in general, the philosophy and the practice of money management, it's really not covered in the school systems. Maybe it doesn't need to be, because honestly, our teachers are there for different reasons. But what that means is that if the kids are going to learn this stuff, it needs to come from somewhere. So if you don't teach your kids how to handle money well, really the question is who will? I would advocate that you do it. Why? Well, there's a number up here. $310,605. An crazy, crazy, crazy precise number. Well, what is that? That is the average amount spent on raising a child born in 2015 to the age of 17 for a married middle-class income couple in the United States. Now, obviously, it hasn't happened yet since those children are maybe 8 at the moment, and so some of this is a projection forward, but it's based on past history and adjusted for inflation of what someone can expect it will cost to get you, well, your children really, each individually up pretty far into their senior year of high school. Notice that does not include college, in case that is something you're planning to fund for your children. So that's a pretty big number by anybody's standards. Most of us don't have that just sitting around in a pocket here and there, and certainly when you have multiple children, the number increases. So if you want to just go pure draconian, what's in it for you? Well, first of all, you can protect your retirement. That's important. Here's the thing. If it costs $310,000 plus or minus dollars to raise a kid up to where they're roughly ready to graduate from high school, well, if they don't actually leave the house and they don't start fully paying for themselves, then that money has to come from somewhere to continue supporting them in their adult years. My observation, adults tend to be more expensive to take care of than children, so that number may go up once you get past that first 17 or 18 years. The graph you see here on the slide is it's a share of young adults living with their parents. And you can see that, and this is in the United States, it has gone up and then down again, and it's on the rise. Now, you could argue that COVID didn't help a lot of people when they either lost their job or were trying to spend more time with family for whatever reason. There were many folks who moved back in with their parents during the pandemic. But that's not where it started going up. You can see that although we hit a low of about 29% in the 60s, it's been on the rise ever since then. Now, many cultures do have a value placed around multi-generational living, and that's great. I am throwing no stones here, and there are no bad dogs. My point is make sure that's a deliberate decision, whether you're moving in with your children or your children are moving back in with you. Make sure it's on purpose and not because you have to. I love the idea of having optionality, that these are choices you make and not um, requirements or necessities just because of financial situations. Now, I don't want my kids living on my sofa or in my basement. That's not my vision of how I want my retirement to be. I want them launched onto their own. I want them having their own apartment, maybe get a house with a couple roommates when they're younger, eventually get their own home. That to me is part of becoming an adult, is being able to care for your own shelter and lodging, being able to put your own food on the table, to hold a job or open your own business, whatever the case may be. They shouldn't be living with me long term. That's going to hold them back socially. It's going to hold them back big picture. And so this is just not what I want for my children. No, there's more. All right. So it's not just about protecting my nest egg. That sounds really selfish. I've been working hard. Kids, get out of my house. Let me go enjoy my retirement. That's part of it. That's not the whole thing. There's some much more interesting elements in terms of the interaction between health and wealth. Now, I actually posted on social media just yesterday a question trying to see what people think. Does health come first and then create wealth, or does wealth come first and then create health? And generally, the answers I got were somewhere a little snarky around, well, have you seen poor people buying organic food? I'm like, well, okay, yes, but let's peel that back a little bit. There's more to it than just that. What we'll see is that they are so intertwined, you cannot call one a chicken or an egg. They go hand in hand. And so, if you can teach your kids about wealth and you can teach them about health, you're setting them up no matter which comes first or which is the more dependent or independent variable. You're helping them in many, many ways by promoting both smart money management as well as healthy behaviors and healthy choices. All right. This was one of the slides that was just my moment. If you look at this, what you see on the left-hand side of the chart, this goes from the lowest household income to the highest in a percentile basis. Women have the edge over men. That's pretty much a given for whatever reason you wish to attribute that to. But the upper graph is women, the lower graph is men. And what you see is that there is a almost linear once you get past the lowest income area. There's almost a linear pattern of the more you make, the more income, the longer you live. Now, this is a household income percentile, so this is annual. This is not cumulative, meaning over all the years. You could say, well, if you live longer, you have more time to make money. Yeah, but that's not what this is. This is on an annualized income basis. If you look at the differences, the expected age at death is what you see on the left hand, the y-axis, and that gap in life expectancy between the richest and poorest 1% is 14 and a half years for men, which includes dads and your sons, and 10 years for your daughter or yourself if you're the mom. So that's pretty dramatic there. Now, we can start to say, yes, well, if you don't have any money, you're more likely to, XYZ, blah, blah, blah. Or if you have a ton of money, you're more likely to do blah, 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 blah. And we'll get into that in just a minute here. There are definitely some behaviors, there are definitely some habits that are different, some of which are driven by your income, some of which drive your income, and vice versa in terms of health. Some of the things drive your health, and some of the things are driven by your health. Again, it's a tangled web, but I want to share this because it's not something I had thought about when I was first saying, hey, let's teach our kids about money. I did not realize how impactful this could be in terms of their actual longevity and their health. Let's go a little deeper. So it's not just about living longer, but it's being healthy longer as well. So as you can see on this chart, this is self-reported data. Poor adults are almost 5 times as likely to report being in fair or poor health compared to adults with family income at or above that 400% of the federal poverty level. Now, for context, in 2014, which I believe is when this came out, that family poverty level was $23,850 for a family of four here in the US. Now, they are also more than three times as likely to have activity limitations due to chronic illness. So, if you have ongoing joint pain or obesity where you just can't move around as much, then that also, of course, impacts the quality of life. Now, second of all, on a more specific basis of what diseases, the researchers did specify very specifically by disease type um, how it all comes through. But basically, those low income American adults do have the higher rates of heart disease, diabetes, stroke, all these other chronic disorders compared to wealthier Americans. On top of that, if you want to go to the very beginning of life, the infant mortality and children's health are also strongly, strongly linked to family income. Part of that is maternal education, part of that is maternal health, getting all the prenatal checkups, having prenatal nutrition, all of those types of things definitely impact people even before they're born. There is an additional thing when we're talking at the beginning of life. Low birth weight is the rates of low birth rate are highest amongst the low income infants. Children in poor families are approximately four times more likely to be in poorer fair health as those children in families with that 400x, that federal poverty level. They also experience higher rates of asthma, heart conditions, hearing problems, digestive disorders, and elevated blood lead levels. Now, where are those coming from? Some of those, you can speculate a lot, and there are hundreds of studies out there. Some of those factors might be um, anything from more smoking or poor water quality or poor food quality or environmental issues with where they live and potential hazards such as heavy metals, things like that. So there are a lot of different potential causes for that, but we can't ignore the big picture conclusion of what this data is telling us. I mentioned asthma. In 2006 to 2008, the prevalence of asthma was 8.2% among non-poor children and 11.7% amongst poor children. That difference right there, again, where did that come from? Is that inherited? Is that environmental? Does that come from in utero? A lot of studies out there, but again, I'm just looking at the big picture to say, okay, there is a clear difference from a statistical significance here between between those who are in a higher income household versus a much lower income household. Last thought on this page is that there are a lot more risk factors for disease amongst children, specifically around childhood obesity, which then is a very strong predictor for obesity as an adult. The habits that you establish very young, I think even before the age of 7, are often imprinted that you really have a harder time to overcome the older you get. We'll talk about obesity again in another moment. I mentioned a moment ago the idea of there being increased rates of risk factors amongst the low income Americans versus the higher income Americans. For example, in 2011, smoking was reported by approximately 1 out of 4 adults from families that earn less than $35,000 a year, compared to 9.2% amongst families that earn $100,000 a year or more. I'm not going to speculate why one group of Americans smoke more than the other, but the reality is that's what people are reporting, and of course they correlate very tightly with this income factor. Where that, of course, then leads to is smoking is one of the worst behavioral choices that people can make in terms of having a healthy lifestyle and longer term health. Not to mention it's very expensive, so that can also put a dent into the household's budget. Now, I mentioned obesity. The obesity rates are higher at 31.9% for the households at $35,000 or less annual income versus 21.2% for the households with $100,000 or more. Um, Going with this is physical activity. And again, you can say, well, do obese people, are they obese because they're not moving, or are they not moving because they're obese? It probably is one of um, those cycles that you just get trapped into. what's interesting is in 2011, the proportion of adults who reported getting those recommended levels of aerobic exercise were 36.1% for those living in poverty, compared to 60.1% for those with incomes at least 4 times higher than that federal poverty level. So, a couple little nuggets of information. You can again decide which ones are correlation versus causation. I keep coming back to the idea that there is just a dramatic difference in terms of how those health factors and the health results correlate, interestingly, to household income. Let's go beyond just physical disease and let's talk about some mental health struggles that people have as well. You can see that on the left-hand side, there is basically a 4x higher rate of or more of these feelings of sadness in the dark blue, hopelessness in the brighter blue, and worthlessness by income band. It tends to taper off right around that 75,000 on up level. Everybody has problems of some kind at some point in their life. And so money cannot always buy you happiness or peace of mind. It certainly can help in many ways, but it is not um, it is not a given that just because you earn extra money or that you resolve some of those issues that all of your mental struggles will go away. Having said that, it's pretty reasonable to expect that when you are on that bottom end of the economic spectrum and you're struggling perhaps to put food on the table or to take care of your family or to have a secure place to put your head down at night and to sleep and to live, those can cause a huge amount of stress as well as just general despair, which is what this in many ways is showing. The the idea of food security, of shelter security, those are pretty big concepts that can tremendously weigh on individuals, not just the parents trying to struggle for their children, but on the children as well. And so there's a trauma involved for folks that don't have those securities, the food security, the shelter security, the feelings of safety wherever it is that they are, or the feelings of stability. Those types of feelings can really manifest in other parts of your life, and it is directly correlated. And these are all correlations. Some will be causal, but many correlations to income level. We've talked about how both mental and physical health is very much correlated adversely to the lower end of the economic spectrum. The worse your income is, the worse your health tends to be on both of those dimensions. Let's do a little bit of a double click in terms of the idea that of where healthy people have advantage in building wealth. The impact that poor health may have on economic resources is probably not fully understood. However, I think in general we can agree that poor health may really restrict a family's capacity to earn income or to accumulate assets, probably and to accumulate assets by limiting work or really heavy medical bills. And that's a big deal. From all the way back at the opportunity of trying to get the job in the first place, there's an interesting study that was done by the International Journal of Obesity back in 1990. And basically, they were looking at the effects of an applicant's health status and qualifications on simulated hiring decisions. Meaning, they set up an experiment where they had prospective hiring managers who would review resumes and then review candidates and then submit a recommendation either to hire or not to hire based on the interviews and the conversations, etc. So what was really fascinating is that the obese applicant was rated as less qualified for the job and less likely to be hired, although they were rated similarly on on personal appearance, attitude during the interview, qualifications, ability to do the job, et cetera, et cetera. So on a further note, the obese applicant was also rated as more likely to be expected to be out of the office for health related issues and to be missing work. These are all just preconceived biases that folks have, just the average hiring manager has going into this experiment to say, hey, is there something statistically significant different here? And that Journal of Obesity study found that yes, actually there is. So if you're perceived as being unhealthy on the obesity side, I think they also looked at diabetes, although how they would know that going into, I don't know. But both of those were very much correlated with less likely to get hired in the first place. So that's a little mind-boggling. Second of all, the whole idea of energy and focus. So when you feel good, your mental and physical energy is high, you're more likely to be able to put that energy toward building wealth. Now, whether that is showing up at work and being present, which is the next idea here, of being in the office when you're supposed to be, of being high energy, of being healthy, then a couple things happen. First of all, you personally can put your energy toward that wealth creation. Again, whether you're working for someone else or your own business, whatever the case may be, I'm trying not to bias either direction because, I think both are perfectly fine ways to earn income. But that idea of being able to put your energy towards something. When you're working for somebody else or your clients, if you're self-employed and some kind of a client-facing job, then it's the idea of, are you present? Are you available? Do you have the energy to go show up as your best? Are you missing work? Are you missing appointments because you have to go to the doctor, or because you don't feel well, or because you've got that brain fog going on and you're just not working at your best? It's not just about being there and doing the work, but it's also how others perceive you and whether or not they're willing to give you the opportunity for that great new project or that high visibility assignment, or the ability to get out there and really learn and grow and strut your stuff. Those are the types of things that set you up for advancement and for bigger and better roles and for bigger titles and bigger paychecks and that next new job opportunity when it comes up. Those are really big deals. Again, if you're not present, if either you're out a lot or you're seen as, well, we could give it to that person, but they're missing a lot of work and we really need someone who can go all in and go that extra mile and maybe work the extra hours, whatever the case may be, it really holds you back if you're not present mentally or physically in the job. And it's hard to get advancement, and then it's hard to get raises, and it's hard to get promotions and bonuses, which again leads to the idea of being able to build up the income, which then, if you're not consuming every dollar that you earn, then you start to save, and then you start to invest, and then you can build the passive. So if you can't get out of that very, very basic hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck, you will never get to where you have enough principal built up to start earning money for you. So again, it's starting at the beginning of that spectrum, but it has that domino effect down the line. There's one more element here, which is that of medical debt. It's it's bigger than we think it is, in my opinion. I was very stunned when I saw some of the statistics. 41%, this is a Kaiser Family Foundation study, 41% of Americans have significant medical debt. And this debt, if it's being paid, is consuming dollars that could be deployed elsewhere, could be deployed toward going back to school, it could be deployed toward savings and then investing for that passive income, it could be deployed toward things for your family, for your kids, it could be whatever, getting out of an apartment and building a house, starting to build equity. 41% of Americans have significant medical debt. That blew my mind when I saw that. Furthermore, as much as 62% of bankruptcies include significant medical debt. 62% of bankruptcies. That's according to a study by the Maine Law Review. 2/3 of bankruptcies are tied to medical debt. So if you're unhealthy, or people in your household are unhealthy, and you're racking up medical debt, that money is not going to building a better future for you and your family. It's simply going to pay off the treatments. There's an adage that medical treatments get you well, medical bills can make you sick. I've experienced this personally. I had a pretty big health issue last year, and the bills that continue to come are just mind-boggling. And so, different topic for another time, but the impact of medical treatments and medical bills are huge on the health of your finances. Here's a little fun fact for you. The Journal of Labor Research published a paper in December of 2011, and they showed a statistically significant correlation between those who exercise and their salary. The ones who exercise regularly do end up showing a 6 to 10% higher salary on average. And what's really fascinating is that those who exercise more frequently tend to have an even higher end of that spectrum. So whether it's the exercise leads to more income or more income leads to more likelihood to exercise, don't know which goes which, but maybe this evening you can take a walk and just stretch your legs a little extra more than you planned. Now let's flip the script the other direction. How does wealth influence health? And as I mentioned earlier, someone was replying to my social media post about, hey, poor people aren't buying organic, and therefore, they're eating conventional foods, and that's part of their difference in health. Okay, maybe. Let's start with that. So we'll talk about food quality. Access to higher both quantities and quality, organic or naturally raised or whatnot, fewer chemical additives, more meal prep options, whether it is ordering it in or having someone do it for you or buying pre-made at the grocery store or whatever. That's a real thing. Food deserts are real. Fast food is a killer. I still remember Super Size Me was a big movie when I was younger, and I think it really surprised a lot of people at how significant the degradation of that gentleman's health was as he went through the experiment of eating only McDonald's 3 meals a day for 30 days. See what happens. Um, but the idea of being able to get healthy food, fruits and vegetables, high quality meats, high protein items, getting away from that processed food, that is really critical in order to just have your body in a good state of being. Never mind Mr. Olympia, right? But just basic health in general from a food point of view. They say you are what you eat, or you are what you ate is another way to look at it. And again, so if you can do organic, great. If you can't, then naturally raised, great. If you can't, then at least more fruits and vegetables, less processed food. Watching those combination of macros between your fats, your carbs, and your proteins, being able to have those balanced meals on a regular basis and a predictable basis makes a big difference. So that's thing one. We'll just start there with the food. And I think this has been talked ad nauseum, so I don't need to go into too much depth here. I think most folks will probably figure that out. On the living conditions, though, that is another element that has a lot of maybe hidden killers that you might not think of just right off the bat. Um, there are 6 ways that neighborhood conditions can influence the health of individuals. The first is certainly the quality of local services. The second is socialization. Third is peer influences. Fourth is your social network. The fifth is exposure to crime and violence. And the sixth is a physical distance and isolation. That is coming out of a study from Ellen and Turner in 1997. I can certainly put the link elsewhere if you would like to read up more on that. But some of the things that are wrapped up in all of that is the idea that low-income neighborhoods and areas of concentrated poverty tend to expose their residents to higher rates of unemployment, crime, adolescent delinquency, social and physical disorders, and resident mobility issues. And that's the ability to get transportation to wherever they need to go. Again, reference the food desert in the prior item. If all you're able to shop at is a local convenience store, you're probably not finding a lot of those fresh fruits and vegetables and higher quality meats. The What's interesting, when I showed the slide that had the men versus women, the longevity between the two, that study did not show a statistical significant difference between healthcare access for the poor and the rich. They normalized for that and still saw the difference in longevity. Now, my personal hypothesis is some folks maybe are more likely to take advantage of that access than others. That's one piece of it. I think there is also the element of there are always copays, and 30 or 60, and now I think mine went up to $70 this most recent plan refresh. $60 or $70 just to go visit the doctor, that's a lot of money. And a lot of folks just don't have that copay. Now, the copay is there for a reason. Part of it is so that people aren't in the doctor every other day, is try to kind of curb that a little bit. But there are some folks that really cannot afford the copay, and so they simply don't go to the doctor. Or back to the transportation point, if it's really hard to go see the doctor, if they have to take 3 different buses, or if they have to borrow a friend's car or get a ride from somebody else, it may just be more trouble than it's worth. There's another element, which is sometimes it's harder when you're in a lower paying job, it's harder to get time off. You may have less vacation time, but also that ability to take time off to either take yourself to the doctor or your kids, or if you have to make a decision, maybe you go for your kids but not yourself and you sacrifice your own health care for theirs. Again, transportation seems so trivial, but yet it can completely impact what people do and do not do with their time, with their money, to be able to just simply get some things done that the wealthier end of the spectrum take for granted in many ways. So the living conditions, again, that includes all of those different bits and pieces, they matter. There are other things around just the neighborhood environment itself. It could have air or water quality issues. There could be high voltage power lines. I think it was Aaron Brockovich was talking about that, right? More light and noise pollution. If you don't sleep well because there's all this noise, lack of sleep has been actually linked to higher incidences of cancer, believe it or not. There may be safety concerns, more limited recreational areas for everyone to get out and exercise, whether it's sidewalks or community park areas or whatnot. But these poorer neighborhoods are often disadvantaged by some of those more subtle things that you don't necessarily think about. The third area would be the idea of better healthcare. So I mentioned this a little bit already. Some of this is, again, even if the access is there, they may not be able to get to it, or they may not be able to um, afford the copay, or they may not be able to take the time off of work, or they may not have the best doctors available in their location that's reasonable to get to. And so the idea of being able to take advantage of the services without, again, if heaven forbid you went and something happened and the doctor did a test and found, congratulations, you have whatever, then all the treatments, that goes to what we were talking about, medical bills and just how quickly they rack up. And then what do you do? Are you actually putting your family's whole financial situation at risk just to try to take care of a health situation? That's a pretty tough decision to make. Let's talk about mental stress. This has been something that's been examined for probably around the last 50 years in earnest. There was a book came out, I believe it was 1975, called The Relaxation Response. And the whole premise behind that is that we've moved from being in the old caveman days, you were on alert for when that saber-toothed tiger was going to jump out, and then boom, your cortisol raised, your adrenaline raised, and you were in this state of massive fight or flight, and then the saber-toothed tiger went away, and then you went back to a relaxed state. The current hypothesis is that we are constantly in that super aroused, super high cortisol, high adrenaline state. And that, caused by stress, is very negatively impactful on our overall physical health. It leads to chronic diseases, it leads to risky behaviors, and they've said stress is a killer, just as smoking is a killer. I think it's been recognized that that is the case. There are many stresses that absolutely lead to mental stress. I mentioned the idea of earlier, the idea of living paycheck to paycheck. Well, it's actually 76% of American households. 76% of American households report living paycheck to paycheck. And so that means if you have one emergency, whether it is a car breaks down or there's a health issue or whatever, then you are in trouble financially. That carries a lot of stress for whoever the bread earners are, really for the whole household. 71% of Americans do identify money as a significant cause of stress, which in this circular kind of negative loop can then cause, it can reduce your productivity at work, it can then impact your job performance, and then of course that then impacts everything in your life. wealth creates margin that, the wealthier folks, they don't need to really worry as much about if something happens, if that health emergency comes up, if that transportation emergency comes up, if a family member comes to them in need, if something happens, they can handle it. But for, again, 71% of Americans identify money as a stressor, and 76% are living paycheck to paycheck. That is huge. And it doesn't seem quite right that only 25% of the population, plus or minus, is sleeping peacefully at night from a money point of view. Another thing is this idea of family stability and the idea of higher education, which is very much funded by wealth, does correlate with lower divorce rates, believe it or not. More to the point, 37% of divorces cite financial problems as a contributing factor. We know that money is one of the top two things that couples fight about. And so the more that you have that buffer, that margin that wealth can create, then hopefully at some point you're just arguing over which investment is the better investment, as opposed to you're spending too much, or we can't afford that, or how are we going to pay this bill, or Susie needs this and Billy needs that, and how are we going to do it, and we have to move out of our apartment, we can't pay the rent. The fights that just blow up families, and of course add instability to children, to the couple itself. It's just a very um, it's just a very compounding concern. And of course, if you do separate, then now you have two households that you need to figure out, and even more inefficiencies on how to spend the money. Now, the last one here, this is a fun little fun fact. So, um, on social status, there is a there's a study done out of Carnegie Mellon, by Professor of Psychology, Professor Sheldon Cohen, PhD. Um, he's used the socioeconomic ladder concept as to study the impact socioeconomic status has on the immune system's ability to ward off infections. So he had originally been looking at a study that was done on monkeys, and it was the idea of susceptibility to upper respiratory infection amongst monkeys. But what he did is that, or what the researchers did, is they looked at what was the effect of the susceptibility to the virus, and the stress didn't have any impact on the effect of the monkey susceptibility. But it turns out that their position in the monkey hierarchy did. The more subordinate the monkey, the more likely it was to succumb to this virus. If you subscribe to the idea that monkeys, being similar primates to humans, have some pretty similar traits and behaviors, then Professor Cohen was extrapolating that the more someone perceived that they were lower versus higher on that hierarchy, the social economic hierarchy, the more or less susceptible to infection and disease and ultimately death that they would be. So for me, that again, science is a crazy thing, but some of the things you can learn, it's like, wow, if I perceive myself as being on the lower end of society from a socioeconomic point of view, I am more likely to get sick. I'm more likely to feel the impacts. Again, it's just this buildup of factors that all work together or work against each other together. So again, it's a really big deal of how do we work on our health to help our wealth, just as we need to work on our wealth to protect our health. Now, one little cautionary tale: wealth without purpose is both mentally and physically destructive. You will see, you've probably, maybe, I don't know, you've potentially seen studies that have shown that simply passing on wealth through the generations, so you have the founding entrepreneur, builds up this huge business, becomes very wealthy, passes it on to Junior, and then Junior passes it on to Trey. And by the time you get to that third generation, 90% of the wealth, if not all of it, is gone, or 90% of the businesses are gone. And that third generation is worse off, bankrupt, if not potentially dead. That's a real thing. I actually have a very, very good friend who comes from a family heritage of just very, very, very tremendous wealth. She actually lost her brother, who he never had to work. He never had to, um, he never had a purpose. And so he got involved in drugs, and eventually it killed him at a very young age. And so you see a lot of those types of family tragedies when that wealth isn't given purpose, when the children haven't found their purpose to either create different wealth or preserve the wealth for other generations or to do something positive with that wealth. It's so important that as you build up this knowledge with your kids, that they are earning what they have and that they are able to put purpose into what they do, both as a means to create it, but then also with it down the line, because wealth without purpose, it can kill them. So, having said all that, how can we not teach our kids about money? I told you I would start with the why. Why do we need to teach our kids about money? So much of it will tie to their health and their ability to be financially secure in the future. You could potentially be helping them live longer, live healthier, live happier, be more mentally stable, mentally thriving. Let me phrase that better. It's so important. And I started off a little tongue in cheek about, hey, keep your kids off your sofa when they're older and protect your nest egg. That is a thing for sure. But if you can give all of these, like really set your kids up for success on this health and longevity point of view as well, why wouldn't we? So that concludes the first part about why it's so important to teach our kids about money.